Our focus in these sessions is wider fields, and our next presentation is titled Metamorphosis, Unleashing the Power of Actuarial Transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. SHAUN LAWTON.
Hi everyone, I'll try not drop my bottle. Great. Silkworms. I hope you still feel like you've joined the right talk. I had silkworms growing up, and a lot of my friends had silkworms growing up. They were these nice, cute little zebra-looking, I used to think of them as mini trains or buses that went and ate away at mulberry leaves that you stuffed in a shoebox. And it was great just feeding them different things. Apparently, depending on the leaf that you fed them, you got a different colored cocoon. I could never get that to work. My cocoons were always yellow. But anyway, silkworm spins a little cocoon. Out pops a moth. Moth spends some time parting around. We get some eggs. And then you put the silkworms in the top of your cupboard and you forget about them because it takes forever for those eggs to hatch. But before our little eyes, we were watching metamorphosis take place. And for a lot of people who had forgotten their box at the top of the cupboard a year later or somewhere around there, they'd often have little baby silkworms crawling down out of their cupboard or something like that. So here we have metamorphosis. And no, my silkworms didn't turn into butterflies. They turned into moths. But butterflies are a lot more beautiful than silkworm moths. And just like we have metamorphosis of a butterfly, we also have metamorphosis in the actuarial world. And so I want to see finance transformation or actuarial transformation as actuarial metamorphosis, where something beautiful comes out at the end. So what are the similarities here, I guess? First thing is actuarial transformation is a never-ending cycle. I don't think this is something that happens once off. We should keep going at it. It's not done and dusted. We've been talking about actuarial transformation for many, many years. It's not something new at all. But it seems to kind of stop and start, and there's something wrong in the middle where it's not very sustainable. There are a lot of small steps which eventually lead to an evolutionary change. When you look at those little silkworm eggs or butterfly eggs, you really don't expect a pretty thing to come out the back end of all of that. That probably wasn't a very good phrase, actually. Anyway, moving swiftly on. Requires different levels of attention and expertise at each stage. So depending on where we are in the metamorphosis, and it's the same with actuarial transformation, you need a different set of expertise. A moth's needs are different from the silkworm's needs. You can't leave the silkworm and give mulberry leaves to the moth. It doesn't work that way. It uses a trusted and experienced process. By experience, I mean there's experience in what is actually happening. The silkworm or the butterfly knows what it's doing. It's kind of got a singular focus with that. And finally, like I already said, something beautiful and new is created at the end of all of that. So why are we here today? So there's three things that I'm kind of breaking these slides down into, or three areas. First is to cover a little bit of background, then maybe some practical lessons, how we can avoid failed finance transformation projects in the future, and finally I'm just going to bring it all together and hopefully make sense of it all for you. Right, so I have a bit of a definition of actuarial transformation. Actuarial transformation is the process of improving the actuarial function by implementing new or improved technologies, processes, and or organizational structures. It's a bit of a mouthful, so I decided let's see how I can change that up a bit. So let's take out transformation and let's call it modernization. I've seen the word modernization being used a little bit more frequently, and actually it does make more sense, especially in the South African context. And modernization is, after all, a little bit more modern. Let's add a bit in here. So it's a process of improving and maximizing the performance of the actuarial function. It's no good just improving the actuarial function if the performance doesn't change. So we really want to get the most out of that function. Add a bit more in, streamlining processes. And then just to finish off the end, we can take processes out again because we've got that in there. We'll take out the or because let's just say and. We've got organizational structures and talent because that's what actually fills the organizational structure. And to wrap it all up, we're going to say to enable these processes. And because we're an actuarial group of people, the actuarial function isn't enough. We want to take over the world. And it reminds me of the cartoon Pinky and the Brain. Whenever I think of the world, I don't know, that just pops straight in there. And that, in case you don't know, that was two lab rats that used to escape every night, Pinky and the Brain. The Brain was the clever one, Pinky not so much. And when they came out at night, Pinky would always say, "What are we going to do tonight, Brain?" And Brain would say, "Tonight, Pinky, we're going to take over the world." So that's just my actuarial wishes. We're all different. So just putting that into a new definition, which I think just makes a little bit more sense, is actuarial modernization is the process of improving and maximizing performance of all actuarial functions by streamlining processes. This is done by implementing new or improved technologies and organizational structures to enable these processes. Right. So what is the importance of change, or why do we want to do this? So let's look at the first block there. Our slides are meant to come up one at a time, but you've got all the information in front of you. Let's just focus on the top left. Insurtech and other sectors. So this is driving change because let's just look at 2022, over $80 billion, and I know that changes in rands almost every 3 seconds quite significantly, but $80 billion was spent in 2022 on Insurtech. And they're bringing about new ways of doing things, bringing new technology to the fore, starting with a blank slate. And that's requiring insurance companies and short-term insurance companies to also think about doing things differently. Because, and it leads on to the next block, is there's a significant increase in competition. And the competition is not just coming from Insurtech, it's from non-traditional places as well, that are, in some cases, just able to get onto in selling life insurance, for example, pretty quickly, and they don't have a lot of the legacy issues. Along with that increased competition, and I'm sure there's, well, for me it was always a swear word, is there's expense reductions, cost savings, and efficiencies. And that's all driving where we are today, and has been for many years. Third is stakeholder demands. So there's two things there. There's increased regulation, which I think we all feel, even though we would hope that IFRS 17 is done and dusted and behind us. In my experience, there's a lot of people that are still in the middle of that, or just trying to make sense of it, I guess. But there's also the clients that we deal with as part of our stakeholders' demands. In a world of client centricity, clients want things now. If you think of the people, or just think of yourself, as the generations are getting younger, they don't want to hang around. They want to use technology. They want it now. They don't want the runaround. When I started work in the mid-90s, the first job that I had was working on the actuarial queue. And so I sat in front of a computer. The computer was running Warp OS 2, which I'd have to go and look up what it looks like. It was an IBM operating system. And onto the queue would come various requests. So a client would call in, and they would ask for their surrender value. And so whoever was on the phone said, "That's great, we'll get you your surrender value, take a few details, policy number, etc. Put on the queue, this client, this policy number wants their surrender value." It would come onto the queue, and then I would look at that, go and look at the policy documentation to see what's in there, go and look at the fund values, and then work out what their surrender value was based on whatever the methodology was for that particular policy. Then I'd put that in, and because I'm an actuary, even though I was one day out of university, that value was trusted, it went through, and that client could then get their surrender value. And that wasn't a 20-minute thing, that was days before the client got the surrender value. Imagine nowadays a client asking for a surrender value and you get it back to him within 5 working days. Our clients want things now. They don't even want to phone, they just want it now, they want to self-serve, and that's driving a lot, I believe, of actuarial transformation as well, just in terms of efficiency, getting things done, and also de-risking that so that we're getting them done as quickly as possible. And then finally, and yes, I am a parent, ad hoc changes. We've had a lot of regulation come along. PGN 110, SAM, IFRS 17, and a whole bunch of other stuff in between. And we're kind of like just putting it on top of each other. Before we've taken a breath, the next thing arrives. There's just a lot of legacy systems that have been migrated. There's just a load of stuff, one on top of the other. Makes me think of San Francisco. Beautiful city that's been destroyed by an earthquake a number of times. And they just build a new one on top. And the concern is at some point in time, something's got to give. And the worry is, when is that going to give? Is that going to give 5 days before you're meant to report? Is it going to give when you've got some other committee deadline? Something's got to give. Oh, my slides are working backwards. Brilliant. Okay, I'll try and work backwards with them. We're developing new skills. So we've identified 6 aims or enablers of actuarial transformation. And these work together in the kind of, what are we trying to do a bit. So those 6 enablers are people, processes, data, systems, methodology, and models. And you can kind of break them down into 3 different specialist areas as well, where people and processes need some kind of process focus, data and systems more the actuarial technology side of things, methodology and models more the actuarial expertise type of work, where there's maybe more technical work. I'm going to go through each of these one at a time. Let's make sure that I'm seeing the same thing. Okay, and this is how I kind of put it together. And this is a slide you'll see throughout the rest of the presentation, is just that these 6 enablers work together and are combined with a central focus on continuous process improvement. It's not something that happens once, and it's something that should be generating and constantly producing, like we said earlier, something beautiful out of it. So let's start with processes. So what is the aim of processes? Consistent and reliable data and actual results, on time, high quality. I don't think we're going to argue with that. How do we get there? Well, one way is well-defined and documented processes. Everything we do is process-driven. Everything that we do, there's a process involved. And we want to be able to rely on the process. We know it's going to work. If we take the same steps the second time around, we want it to have the same outcome and the same result. And we just want that certainty. Through this presentation, we have done a number of, MBE has done a survey, and it's based on what we call the Actuarial Performance Management Framework, so APM for short. And as part of that assessment that we sent out to a number of clients, and this is globally, so it's coming out of the UK and out of South Africa, we've captured a number of statistics, specifically on these enablers. And we use that to kind of work out what areas of a business should we start working on. Like I said, it's not just that big step, it's where do we start? That's a lot safer. And where do we actually start? So I'm going to show some statistics along the way, which just gives you an idea, based on the survey that we did from the UK and SA mostly, but there are some other countries in there, what we see. So based on the survey, 50% of the respondents say that the processes do not meet time expectations. Now, I'm sure everybody's reporting on time, they're taking the results to committees on time. So what does this actually mean? I think it means that there's this mad rush towards the end. And in that mad rush, there's some accuracy potentially that's being lost, there's some shortcuts probably being made, a bit of actuarial judgment, a few tweaks and things like that in the process. But half of the people, effectively half the people in this room, feel that their processes don't meet those time expectations. And we want to really rely on that. 40% feel that the quality of the results can be improved. So I kind of think of a restaurant, our teams, we're all together as a team, and we're going out for dinner tonight. So the first thing I do is I go onto Google and I look for a restaurant in Sandton. It gives me a whole list of things. And then I say, okay, as long as 40% of the reviews are positive, or more than 40% of the reviews are positive, I'm okay. No, I don't. I look at the top few. I want big marks. I don't want 40%. And it's quite interesting for me that from a self-assessment point of view, the respondents felt that the quality of results could be improved. And maybe this ties in with the time. If you're rushing the time, quality's got to give. If you're giving better quality, time's got to give. The bottom line is something's got to give eventually. People. Now, people's a bit of a favorite of mine. I love leadership. I have a passion for leadership. And for me, people is all about leadership. If you don't have any people, what are you leading? And what's following you? So the aims of people is to leverage the employee's actuarial potential and having the right people doing the right things. So we've got expensive resources. We want to have them doing the things we're paying them to do. We don't want them to be fixing all the data. We want them to analyze the data, as an example. And one of the ways that we can do this is through talent management. Just looking at some of the stats, 75% of the respondents felt that career development plan was partly or not effective. That's massive. So only 25% are happy with their career development plan. So I don't know if there's any management, but there's not a lot of leaderships coming through. And an example of that I can think of, and it's been like that through most of the jobs that I've worked at, is as a student you get lots of support. You often have and the student study policy is often a really good retainer or attraction way of retaining or attracting talent. And so the student would get a lot of support, and there'd be mentoring and there'd be coaching and all of that kind of thing, and it'd be great. But once they qualify, they're given a team to manage. And that support seems to step away a bit. And so one of the companies that I've read recently actually have an actuarial talent management career framework that they're using. And that's not just focused on students, but on qualified actuaries as well. And I think that's really good talent management. 8% of their time is spent on meeting business objectives. So that's not a huge amount of time. It means that there's a whole lot of other stuff that's been done that's maybe unnecessary. But like I said, all these little enablers work together, and there could be something else in that when you look at them all together. Okay, I want to look at systems, models, and methodology together quickly, just from a definition point of view. When I was putting this together, I realized that there's a number of different, if you say system to someone, they'll interpret that differently, or model or methodology. So starting with systems, that's the software. Those are the apps, those are the tools, those are the platforms. That's Monet, that's Profit, that's Rafim, that's Excel. When we look at models, we're actually looking at the structure of the model, the design of the model landscape, how the methodologies are organized. And then when we're looking at methodology, that's the IP. That's what is needed. That's how we're going to calculate the surrender value. How are we going to calculate the risk adjustment? That's where the specifications come out. So the methodologies are put together in a model, and there's a system or a tool that'll run that. So looking at the one at a time, systems should be easy and intuitive. So again, I think of a game I used to play called Command and Conquer. used to get a CD and a big thick manual. And I didn't read the manual. And I'm very sure hardly anyone else read the manual. But every now and then, there was something that someone would refer me to that was in the manual that actually made the gameplay a whole lot better. There was a tank with a special ability. And I didn't know it had a special ability because I didn't read the manual. So we just played some way till you found someone else do something to you and it didn't work out so well. Nowadays, the games don't give you a manual. There's a tutorial built in. There's tooltips. It tells you as you're going along what it does. And so from a system point of view, that's what we're after. We want easy to use, intuitive, not complicated. When you hand it over, the next person should know what they're doing. Process enablement, what I mean there is often the system is built and designed and then it gets shoved into a process. And it doesn't always wire up quite nicely in that process. So it's just thinking before you put a system together is how you link the bits and pieces together, how the wire is going to go in. Have we thought of this so that it's seamless and enables the business rather than there is a problem with the business? And then appropriate flexibility. I say appropriate because I love Excel. I know a lot of people that love Excel. I love the flexibility of Excel. I can open anything. I can stick anything in a sheet anywhere or a cell. But in the work situation and in really key processes, I think that sometimes we do that kind of work and then we hand it over to the next guy, and sometimes the next guy should actually just rebuild the Excel spreadsheet because it's so hard to work out what's going in there. So it's actually using the flexibility, but having some appropriate guides and guidelines around that. 63% of people believe that the systems don't enable their processes. So it almost means that there's a lack of alignment between the system and the process, and it's just been smashed in. It doesn't quite fit, but we need to just carry on with the work because there's time constraints. There's a lot to do. Looking at models. So the aim there is to create insights and outputs to meet business needs. They should be easy and efficient. And then modularization is something that people are starting to tend towards. And so just looking at modularization, I'd like to dream a little. At the one extreme, I forgot that part, 93% of people feel that things could be further modularized. But let me talk about that. At the moment, we'll have a model. And it's got all sorts of methodologies in there. On the left-hand side, we've got some assumptions and inputs, and we get results out the other side. We run the model, it runs everything. It takes a fair amount of time to run and produce the results. If I come along and I go, actually, I just want to change the risk discount rate, I'll come and change that, or some other assumption. It'll run the entire model in the same way it just has and produce the results. So it looks something like this. We've got our results. So like I was saying, let's dream and think of something that may be possible, something that we're busy experimenting with. What if we had several models, each doing its own thing and being quite independent, but interdependent on the overall model and on some of the bits itself? Let's call that a model of models. We have the same thing. On the left-hand side, we've got our inputs. On the right-hand side, we've got results. And we're going to go and change the risk discount rate. But the risk discount rate only needs to recalculate certain things. It doesn't have to recalculate everything. And so it should look something like this. Much quicker, a lot more efficient. Imagine your AOS calculations, how quickly they could run. Because the only time being spent is on the calculation that matters. That's the dream. Methodologies. So the aim here is to support effective business decisions, align with regulatory requirements, and make sure that they're not more complex than the business needs. So throughout these enablers, I've been talking about alignment between what the business needs and the stuff we're actually doing. And so here we're actually saying that often what happens is we create this huge methodology, this complicated thing, because that's what regulation requires. But the reality is sometimes that doesn't always meet the business needs. And that's come through in this survey as well, is 20% of people believe that methodologies are proportional and relevant to the complexity of the business. That's 80% that feel like we have a misalignment between methodologies and the business needs. Maybe recent regulations have made them feel a little bit worse. And I actually think that overseas is probably worse than South Africa with this kind of thing, where it's over-egged. Data. So this is the sixth one. Data, for me, kind of is the foundation of everything that we've discussed. If there's something wrong with the data, it's just going to carry on through the line. The aim of the data is to generate better business decisions and to accelerate performance. So if our data's got a problem, then we've got issues with business information. We've got issues with the data we use in our valuation, in our pricing. Sometimes those sources might be different. We want a single source. So data can be the weakest link. Goodbye. From the survey, we say that 8% of people strongly agree that data is complete and accurate. 8%. Must be an error. But that's like strongly agrees. So let's take that a little step further. 36% are not confident that data is complete and accurate. So we're busy producing numbers where we're not always confident. I guess that's why we have reserves and we have other adjustments and things like that. And we have this rush to the end and then run out of time. Finally, 21% feel that their data flow is automated. And just a quick thing there is, you don't want to just automate processes. You want to streamline them first and then automate them. And that's that set of enablers that work together with an underlying culture of continuous process improvement, driving the business in small steps and focusing where we need to focus. And for me, these are the areas we should be focusing on in terms of finance transformation to drive this out. So just a few, oh wait, I got a poll. I almost forgot about my poll. I believe that on your app, you should be able to fill this out, and it should give you really what it is in your organization, just consider what enabler is the lowest ranking. So what is your weakest link, you believe, out of those 6 enablers? Is the poll on? Oh, there's still a bit of movement going on there. Okay, I think we can call it. So data and processes. Oh, it's still changing. But data and processes seem to be the weakest link, which is very much what we found in the survey in general. The survey gives loads of data on the, to quite a reasonable level of detail, but data and processes isn't a surprise, which I'm grateful for in some ways because it ties in with our findings. So next poll is what enabler is the strongest or the highest ranking? Okay, people, mostly people, which is also what we found in the survey. People by far outranked any other enabler. It was kind of like the one that stood out And data and processes were the two that were really far down the list. And I think given that general feeling, these are good places to start. Start with your data. Start with fixing your processes. People is good, don't ignore it. It's important. But in terms of getting your best bang for buck and maximizing performance in your actuarial team, from an actuarial transformation point of view, processes and data is the place we should start getting in there. Okay. So just a few practical lessons. Things that we can do to make sure that our finance projects or our actuarial transformation projects succeed and don't fail. So I've got four things up here. So make sure that there's collective ownership. There shouldn't be a single owner. A single owner is not going to be able to do everything no matter how good they are. Make sure that there's a few people that are owning this together. And even better, from a consultant point of view, is don't get the consultant to do this. Sounds a weird thing to say. Am I fired? Get the consultant to take over the business as usual in order to enable the team to do this, with support from the consultant, obviously. Because what we've often found is the consultant comes in, it does the project work, it walks away, and then the BAU team doesn't understand what's going on. Getting the change to be sustainable is really hard. So I recommend you still get the consultant in, but just get them to do the BAU work. You take over BAU, help with the running of the team. It's not an all or nothing necessarily, but help with that so that there's buy-in from the team. They are busy on the project. They're the ones that are making the changes and implementing them with the relevant support. Tied in with that is relying on interconnected influences. So this isn't an actuarial problem. The I should really just use a different word. Interconnected influences are just other teams. Technology, IT needs to be involved in that. The rest of the finance team needs to be involved. There isn't a silver bullet. There's no one answer that's going to solve all of these problems either. Allowances for constant change. So problems evolve. The problems that you have now, as you change them, are going to change the problems that you have set out ahead of you. It's like a flagpole connected to a wall. Where the flagpole's connected to the wall, that's solid. And your short-term goals should be solid and locked in. But as you slide down the flagpole, it gets a little bit more flexible. And so we need to be more flexible with our longer-term goals. Because as we change the short-term goals, as we fix them at least, or the issues, the longer-term ones could change. And we've got to allow for that flexibility. And finally, the ability to overcome inertia. That just means that I don't have a problem. I still produce the results. It doesn't matter that there's a whole line of dead bodies behind me. I've got the results out. Everybody can take the weekend off. So it's kind of like, I've seen a cartoon recently with a dog sitting in a burning house. And the dog's sitting at a table drinking his coffee, and there's massive flames all around him. And the dog says, I'm fine. So inertia, I think, is something that has to be overcome just in terms of a finance transformation project, because you've got to convince people that even though the system is currently working, we want to maximize performance. We want to get the system working better. So bringing all of this together. So back to the metamorphosis, actuarial metamorphosis, but with a focus on these 6 enablers, underlined by continuous process improvement. Early beginnings don't become beautiful outcomes in one step. It needs to take time, planning, and proper design. Dedicated time is spent on each part of the process. And maybe one part of the process should be focused on one at a time rather than trying to swallow the whole thing. Everybody knows what their job is. In terms of measurement, we know where we are now and where we want to go. If you put something into Waze or Google, maps, it needs to know where you are before it can start giving you directions to where you want to go. And I think that's quite important, just in terms of being very clear on where you are now. The external environment matters and does impact what you're doing. So you will need to be flexible, and change is inevitable. So with all of that, and in closing, I have little more to say, but to just leave you with something to think about. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sean. So we have time for a few questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? The mic is on the way.
Please, Jaak.
Hi, Sean. It's Jaak Niemand here. Sean, maybe just go back to your last slide, the little cartoon. That just made me think. You say that many respondents say the.
Thank you.
All right. So maybe just imagine the cartoon, please. Then.
I don't know if the guys at the back, if you can take it back to. For some reason, it's a little stuck.
Okay, but I was going to ask the question. We say that our people are, is our greatest asset, and the greatest problem is sort of around systems, and I can't even remember systems or data or processes, either or all of the above.
Data and processes.
Sorry, it was data and processes. So what stops our greatest asset fixing our greatest problem? And then you put up the cartoon, which sort of suggests some of it.
I think there's probably a few answers here, but thank you for the question, Jaak. I think that one of the things is we aren't treating it as an asset. So we did a project quite recently where the company wanted to understand a particular outcome of certain changes to their parameters in order to work out profitability and how they could improve that. And it required data sources from across the business, actuarial data, raw data, MI. It required all that data to be pulled together. And then we needed to create a single view of all of this data, which wasn't as easy as it sounds because the actuarial data had changes made to it, or it came from a slightly different source than the raw data and the other data. But anyway, we managed to create a single view which then drove out the outcomes that we were after. The interesting thing is when we put the report together and had the feedback session with that client, the conversation wasn't around this is how we can improve profitability. The conversation was around these are all the lessons we've learned about how we can better leverage our data. Because there was so much stuff we had to do to get to that outcome. The lesson was actually you shouldn't have to do all of that stuff. You should be treating data as an asset. You should be investing in your asset. So I think, in short, my answer is I think part of the problem is not being seen or treated as an asset because it's not being invested in. So it's not being fixed. It's just being worked around, if that makes sense. Yeah. Any other questions? Right at the back.
Thanks, Sean. John Davidge. I've dropped questions on the app, but easier just to ask. Is there not a danger you talk about the real goal about getting to continuous process improvement? What I largely see is when you try and do a transformation project, it's a project, and you say, we've arrived. Our butterfly's got wings, we're done.
Yeah.
But then that becomes the process, and in 5 years' time, your process is bog standard and outdated. How do you work on transformation, actually scrapping the 6 things around and focusing on the culture to get people to think in each of their spots, how are we always trying to improve, rather than saying we're having a project to improve our process as it stands now?
Yes. Good question. A few things are flying through my mind all at the same time. The one is, it's in my experience, everyone's experience might be slightly different, is that these projects often try and tackle too much in one go. So we want a finance transformation project, we're going to spend 50 million rand on it, and we're going to change and fix the world, all in one go. And, I mean, obviously you're going to lose sight of what you're trying to achieve. And so the recommendation is break it down into phases, starting with your biggest bang for the buck. And get the buy-in from people along the way. I think in terms of continuous improvement, I don't think that's just going to fall out of the box. I don't think that's going to happen. Because like you said, that's a culture. And a culture has to start at the... Thank you. I don't know if it's me bumping things or what's going on. But the culture has to start from the top down. So there needs to be that focus on continuous process improvement. How can we do things better everywhere? On the people slide, one thing I didn't mention was the way we treat our employees should be the way that we expect our clients to be treated. Because it's part of the culture. So I think that one of the big things there is, from a sustainability point of view, you've got to, what you're saying is 100% right. You've got to get that right, where it actually just becomes automatic. It's how we work, it's what we do. And there's different ways of engendering innovative culture, where people get frustrated with something and you almost want them to say, if something frustrates you, let's talk about it. Because it's normally the frustration that's going to result in innovation or change. If everything's okay, there's no reason to change. Whether it's, I've just spent too much time fixing this data, or this process keeps breaking, or someone takes over a new process and it's not properly documented, or the documentation's old. Those kind of frustrations, you almost want to encourage your team to take the frustration or a righteous anger and go and do something about it, but in the right way. Don't just make another spreadsheet, which is probably what I would do, because I like that. I don't know if that quite answered your question. Yeah, great. Any other questions? Right. Are there any questions on the app?
No additional questions. I guess, Sean, from my side, I think in my experience, if you ask any actuary, they would invest in the data, right? It's part of our daily lives. But how do you convince, the rest of the organization to get on that same page, to come on the same journey?
So referring back to that example I gave a little bit earlier on that client, where the realization was we should be treating data as an asset. Mm. That was an interesting exco discussion, because the person we were doing the work for, sort of as we were preparing for our exco presentation, was push data is an asset. Data is an asset. We need to say data is an asset. Because it's obviously not that straightforward. There isn't that buy-in necessarily, because I think everyone thinks everything's okay. The house might be burning down, but it's okay because we're still doing what we need to do. And that's where I think the maximizing performance comes in, is we can do it better. We can do it more efficiently. And if we look forward, we're going to have to do that, because reporting timelines aren't going to get extended. They're probably going to get shorter. There's probably going to be new regulation at some point in time. We need to not have to worry about the data and focus on the data all the time. So I think if you can show the impact of better data on your timelines and the reduced risk of mistakes and a number of other things, I think that's a good start. I mean, yeah, it might be a bit different now, but data reserves were often quite big numbers. Any other questions?
I think there's one more question at the back.
Yeah, I think it's not even a question. I'm just finding that this is a common theme, I think, across quite a few of the discussions, because for those that attended the Africa seminar yesterday, one of the things that came up was definitely around how things can be improved, and why it is that there's always a feeling that there's not enough resources, for example. And also with some of, I guess, with the experience that I've had with a couple of companies as well, I find that there's just always a feeling that we are understaffed, there's not enough resources. It's a culture thing, I think, in our profession, where I think we definitely need to have more of a project approach to how we do our work. For example, having 1 or 2 people that are dedicated to improving processes or taking on projects to work hand in hand with consultants, as opposed to, like you mentioned earlier, just having a consultant completely own a process that chances are is not going to be fully taken on anyway on a BAU business, or at least not for a while, if people that have been doing BAU are used to doing things a certain way. So I think we are understaffed, we don't have capacity, everyone should be doing BAU. So I think it's a matter of maybe a culture shift of having 1 or 2 people that are just dedicated to some kind of project work, even if it means improving processes, data, anything.
Cool. Yeah, and it's a prioritization issue in that case. It's just like that cartoon, which I probably won't be able to get back to again, but yeah. I love that cartoon because it just says so much stuff to me. And it's just, what's so funny is it's ridiculous, but it's so true. I'm not talking about the actuarial world, I'm not trying to, rip us off, or life insurance companies, just about everything. I think of my personal life. My wife wants me to do something. I don't have the time. But if I just did that thing, I could save a lot of moaning, and I could save a lot of stress. And I think that's kind of, it's exactly that. It's how can we make the time, because we know we're going to save the time. So what is the enabler? And I think, like I suggested, I'm not here to sell business today. Obviously, I'm just here to provide information. But somebody to support you while you get this stuff done is going to pay off dividends in the long run. And it's for me, it's a case of maybe there's a bit of a dare to dream part. Is dream about how life could be, and then how you're going to get there. Because I know, I've worked in valuations before. I know how we roll. When I started in valuations, you did it once a year, maybe twice a year, and you still didn't have time to fix in between. Now you're doing it all the time, it feels. Well, obviously there's no time because you're doing it all the time, but it's how you make that significantly quicker so that you guys sitting here do the things that you actually really want to do. The analysis, the problem solving, increasing profitability, all of those kinds of things, client centricity, etc. Anything else? I don't actually have a clue what the time is because I left my watch charger at home, so brilliant. Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for attending. If you want to chat, I'm around. But yes, it was really great to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shaun. We appreciate it. Great presentation. It was quite eye-opening. We're going to take a bit of a break, and during that refreshment break, there will be a Liberty mindfulness session if you'd like to take a pause before you move on. And while you're on your break, remember to pop into the chess tournament that's happening in the convention area. The semi-finals are set to unfold shortly, and there are lots of exhibitors that you can visit while we're taking our break. The Discovery Working Lounge is something new, and also the coffee bars, which are brought to you by Discovery, by Hanover Re, by Milliman, Old Mutual, RGA, and SA3. And then the second plenary for the day is at 3:45. That will be in the ballroom, and we hope to see you there. Thank you, everybody.